So it's been 2 months since Cataclysm Classic's full release and near enough 3 months since we saw the changes to talents and classes that came at the end of April for the pre-patch. And it's fair to say that we are well and truly settled into the latest edition for the progression of Classic WoW at this point. And since Cata's announcement at BlizzCon, many players have jumped off the bandwagon, claiming and reiterating points we've heard for the past 14 years, about how it wasn't the best of expansions for WoW. Yet there are a lot of redeeming factors to the expansion, even to players like me who weren't too keen on the original tenure of Cataclysm back in 2010. And as time has gone on, I've now pretty much experienced all I wanted to in Cata Classic for this point at the moment until Firelands comes out. So it's begged the question for me and a lot of other players out there amongst all the hype and angst towards Cata Classic. Has it been better than expected, or just as bad as people made it out to be? Let's take a look. But just before we jump in, feel free to like and subscribe if you're new here, as it helps me out a bunch. So thanks very much indeed. Now, let's get on with it. First and foremost, looking back through the experience of Cataclysm Classic, so far I'd argue strongly that it has indeed been great fun. For me, there was great buzz in the pre-patch, like usual for most pre-patches leading up to a new expansion, or in Classic the next expansion in progression. And whilst there was more uneasiness in the player base in comparison to the pre-patch for Burning Crusade or Wrath, it's undeniable that servers had been cleaned up for the most part and there was real excitement running through them. And I had far more fun than I expected running ICC, with the new talents and class changes feeling like there was a return of community. That felt long lost along the way towards the end of Wrath, attributed to issues that happened at the end of Wrath, but also due to Cataclysm Classic's announcement. And when the expansion dropped, leveling was also a really top-notch experience for me, where I covered my own journey on the channel, taking a level in each zone, only to then return to those zones once I hit 85 to grind out those last few quests for rep. Then at reaching max level, running heroics and grinding said rep for those first few 359 pieces felt smooth and streamlined, alongside taking on Tolbarad dailies to give some structure to each time I logged on, and a long-term goal to aim towards for getting a few pieces to go into raids. And speaking of raids, I expected them to be pretty good, as back in original Cataclysm I raided a lot and they were the key highlight for me. And as expected, Barradin Hold and Bastion of Twilight remain my favourite raids to run, albeit Barradin Hold feeling a little empty at the moment. But fond memories of Blackwing Descent and Throne of the Four Winds all came back, although Omnitron defense system still gives me nightmares. Yet this is kind of where the concern started for me. I was surprised how raiding on normal felt far easier this time around, where back in original Cataclysm normal raids did feel like they posed some form of challenge, whereas this time around I kind of just flew through them pretty easily. And maybe you can attribute that to knowing tactics already or having previously run the content, but there were certain bosses that really did feel far too easy and I'm not sure why, where previously even in old Cata, where you did do the mechanics correctly, they still had to get pushed over the line somewhat, whereas running normal in classic Cata, there doesn't seem to be any danger or issues that ever come around, even for slightly more complex fights. I mean, for Cho'Gall he's essentially tank and spank now, and we need to mention how the Valor Point system got changed, pretty much meaning you can farm the majority of the gear you needed in one go, as weekly caps disappeared pretty fast, and you got to set a huge cap on Valor Points instead. And whilst this is great fun in some ways, it felt like it made a lot of other ways of grinding certain pieces of gear, such as Tolbarad or farming reputations, felt a bit pointless, when you could just grind dungeons and get enough 359 pieces and most of your tiers set straight from the get-go now. So for Cataclysm Classic and my journey, boredom has kind of just set in. And in Vanilla, Burning Crusade, Wrath, and especially in Retail WoW, part of the appeal of the game is making alts and varying classes to experience the game from different points of view, to see how the game works and just generally speaking enjoying playing a different class. Yet with Cataclysm I don't have any drive or interest in the slightest in leveling alts. Even my Wrath alts that are still sat there at level 80, I can't be bothered doing the 5 zones again. Surprisingly, despite having such fun with Cataclysm leveling and then gearing for raiding, no part of me is pulled towards doing it more than once for one character, unlike the original trilogy of Classic or even in Retail. And it's a strange point to be at for Cataclysm Classic, as I'm sure there's lots of people enjoying their time in the expansion and I'm still happy for them. I mean, even from the get-go like mentioned, I was someone who had very mixed feelings towards Cataclysm, so I was happy to be presented with a surprisingly pleasant experience the second time around. But even a few weeks in I was already worried about the longevity, and well, here we are a few months in, and maybe that's just my response to Cata, but it seems a shame that things have fizzled out big time, and at a time when things have happened exactly the same for Season of Discovery with Phase 4's introduction, things aren't looking great for Classic in general at the moment. But thankfully I don't mind too much, as I am a Retail and a Classic player, so I'll happily be playing the War Within's pre-patch and then the War Within, and then eventually Firelands at some point. But this does beg concern for me, for the general state of Classic WoW, where nothing really seems to be pulling me in like like it has for the past 5 years. This is the first time I've genuinely felt pretty disconnected from Classic, and maybe that's relative more to the whole state of Classic and not just Cataclysm. But like mentioned, I didn't feel this way for Vanilla, Burning Crusade, Wrath, or even the start of Season of Discovery for Phase 1 and 2. Classic seems to just be at a bit of an odd point, and Cataclysm is a huge part of that. So overall, if you had to ask, has Cataclysm been better than expected at this stage? I'd argue, yeah, it's surpassed my expectations massively, and I didn't think I'd enjoy its release as much as I have, despite how split the player base was, and the ways in which I saw a lot of friends quit Classic WoW in the same way they did back in 2010. But for me, I'm not really drawn into it the same way for other variations of Classic at this point, and it's only a few months in. Leveling alts doesn't appeal to me, and I'm not really interested in trying new classes unlike previous expansions, or like in retail WoW. I think maybe a part of it is that although we are in Cataclysm, I know we have more big changes on the way, Missa Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, or even Legion if we get that far. And at this point, I'd rather just stick with one class than having to repeat leveling and learning 3 different classes. But in saying that, content I remember being great, such as raiding, has remained great. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed revisiting the leveling zones and areas like Tol Barad. Yet still, whilst being much better than expected in many ways, the apathy is truly setting in for me, sadly. But do let me know what you think. How has Cataclysm Classic been for you? Is it better than you remember or worse than you thought? Or am I simply wrong and Cata remains a booming expansion? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. Yet as always, take care out there, and I'll see you on the next one. As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.